And once again, House Democrats trying to stop former President Donald Trump. This time they have introduced a bill that, if passed, would bar Trump from holding any federal office in the future. The bill is spearheaded by Rhode Island Democratic Congressman David Cicilline. It has 40 Democratic members voting for it. Obviously, there are not going to be any Republican co-sponsors. The legislation cites Section 3 of the 14th Amendment in the Constitution. That section prohibits anyone from holding any public office if that person, quote, engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. In the bill, the Democratic lawmakers state that the former president broke that part of the Constitution when the January 6th riot occurred. In a press release, Congressman Cicilline says, quote, Donald Trump very clearly engaged in an insurrection on January 6, 2021 with the intention of overturning the lawful, fair results of the 2020 election. You don't get to lead a government that you tried to destroy. Professor Emeritus at Harvard Law School and author of the book, The Price of Principle, Why Integrity is Worth the Consequences, Professor Alan Dershowitz joins me. Good evening, sir. Look, I suppose it's no surprise that the January 6th committee is going to make a referral to the Department of Justice, but the Department of Justice can do its own investigation without them. So is this, what does this mean? Is there any impact of the House doing that?
It's only political, obviously. The Justice Department will toss the referral into the waste bag. They know this committee was not a fair committee. It only of get Trump, anti-Trump people. They knew what the results would be before they heard a single witness. They didn't allow any cross-examination by any Trump supporters or any member of Congress who had a different point of view. As far as the 14th Amendment is concerned, this is really, really frivolous. They cite Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, but they don't cite Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. Section 4 makes it clear that insurrection and rebellion refer explicitly to the Civil War, to the war over slavery. The fourth section refers to emancipation of any slave. This was not a general provision about protests. This is not applicable to Black Lives Matter protests. It's not applicable to efforts during the unionization period of the United States when there were protests. It's not applicable to socialists in the 1920s trying to overthrow the government. It was only applicable to the Civil War, and that's the way it was interpreted by its framers. That's the way it's been interpreted ever since. It's never been used outside the context of the Civil War. And this is just another attempt to try to subvert democracy. Look, I'm going to vote against Trump if he runs again. I'm a liberal Democrat, but I want the right to vote against him. I don't want a bunch of congressmen telling me who should run and who shouldn't run. That's the most anti-democratic thing imaginable. It's what happens in banana republics. It's not what happens in the United States. People who don't want Trump to be president should devote their energies to electoral changes, to fighting him in the primaries, to making sure people don't donate money to his don't donate money to his campaigns. That's the way you fight to defeat a presidential candidate. You don't invoke an amendment that has absolutely nothing to do with January 6th.
Do you think that the Democrats, especially the ones who have taught even constitutional law in law schools, I mean, many of them are lawyers, took constitutional law. Do you think they know this? Do you think that they are so that they know better, and it's just thinking that, like, well, this is politics, we have very different rules? Because the thing that bothers me most of all about all of this is the world is watching us. And, you know, I didn't like the world seeing January 6th and seeing what happened there. I didn't like that. But, you know, the world continues to watch us, you know, as we do things like this.
Sure. Jamie Raskin was my student. He's a very smart guy. He taught constitutional law. He knows better than to use the 14th Amendment as a general prohibition against people who have engaged in activities which he may not like from running for president. He knows the 14th Amendment was designed.
So why is he doing it?
Because
why?
He can gain political capital by doing it. By the way, it's not hurting the Trump campaign. It's helping it. It's keeping Trump in the news. It's getting sympathy and support from some people at the center. It's absolutely backfiring. And more importantly, it's hurting the Constitution. You can't just use the Constitution the way you want to use it as a weapon to try to prevent people from running for office. It doesn't It does a terrible service to our Constitution to misuse it in this way.
Well, meanwhile, I mean, but talk about sort of a useless gesture. I mean, like it's not going to happen. But the other useless gesture is the January 6th committee saying we're going to vote and we're going to ask that the Justice Department investigate this criminally. Well, the Justice Department already is. I mean, the Justice Department doesn't take marching orders from Congress, and yet they're all going to act like, they're all going to go to the microphones and act like this is a serious moment and, something. Well, it is serious, but the Justice Department's already doing this.
Right, and it also violates the spirit of the Bill of Attainder clause of the Constitution. There are very few rights in the body of the Constitution. Mostly they're in the Bill of Rights, but one of the rights in the Constitution is no bills of attainder. That means that this is not a legislative function to figure out who should be prosecuted. It's an executive function and a function of the Justice Department. And when the legislature gets involved in referring cases to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution, it violates the spirit that says, no, legislatures don't make recommendations for who gets prosecuted. That's up to the Justice Department. So shame on the lawyers on this committee for violating the spirit and, I believe, the letter of the Constitution.
Well, let's hope that when the Republicans take over in January that they don't likewise do these criminal referrals with the same sort of...
These are contagious.
I know. It's like, I would hope that someone would put the brakes on this sometime. But Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you, sir.
Thank you.